He built an empire on fear, a king no one dared to question. But the day an orphan boy walked into his office and whispered, "She told me to find you," everything he buried came back to claim him. The storm hit Chicago like the sky had finally lost control. Rain slammed against the towering glass walls of Vail Tower, turning the entire city into a blurred illusion of lights and shadows. Thunder rolled low and heavy, like a warning no one could escape. At the very top floor, where silence was more dangerous than noise, Roman Vail sat behind his black marble desk like a king carved from something colder than stone. His empire stretched across docks, casinos, and the quiet corners of politics where deals were signed in whispers and sealed with loyalty or betrayal. No one entered his office without permission. No one dared test the boundary between life and disappearance. Then the private elevator opened. The soft mechanical sound cut through the floor like a blade. Every guard turned instantly. Hands moved to weapons, eyes sharpened, breath slowed. Fear did not show on their faces, but it lived in the tension of their bodies. The system had not authorized anyone. No meeting, no arrival, no warning. And yet, someone stepped out. A boy, 8 years old, small, fragile by every visible measure. His jacket was torn, hanging unevenly from his thin shoulders. His shoes were soaked, leaving faint wet prints behind him. His hair clung to his forehead, damp from the storm outside. But his eyes held something that did not belong in a child. Not innocence, not fear. Something steady, something unbreakable. "Stop," one guard ordered sharply. The boy didn't. He walked forward like the command had never reached him. 2 guards stepped close, blocking his path, but he slipped between them with a quiet certainty that made them hesitate. That hesitation was unnatural. This was Roman Vail's flaw. Men twice his size had collapsed under the pressure of this place. Yet this child moved through it as if danger had already tested him, and failed. The guards followed, tension rising, weapons now fully raised. The door to Roman's office opened. Inside, the air shifted instantly. Roman Vail didn't look up at first. He was reading a file capable of triggering war across 3 territories before sunset. His power did not require urgency. It existed in stillness. But when the room fell too silent, when even his men forgot to breathe, he lifted his gaze. The boy stood in front of his desk. For 1 second, nothing moved. Then the boy reached into his pocket and placed an old silver locket onto the black marble surface. Click. The sound was small, almost meaningless, but it shattered the room. Every man froze. Breath stopped. Even the storm outside seemed to fade. Roman's eyes dropped slowly to the locket, then lifted again to the boy's face. And something inside the king broke its silence. The eyes. The boy had her eyes. Grace Holloway, a name buried so deep inside Roman's past that even memory had learned to stay quiet. She had been the only person who ever stood close to him without fear. The only one who had ever made the world feel safe. And she had vanished, leaving behind silence, questions, and a wound Roman had locked beneath layers of control and power. Now those same eyes stood in front of him, alive. His heart pounding began slowly, then harder, each beat echoing louder than the thunder outside. The guards raised their weapons, instinct screaming danger. But Roman lifted one hand. Everything stopped. No one moved. No one spoke. The boy's small fingers trembled slightly, but his gaze never broke. In a quiet whisper, he said, "She told me to find you, if they came back." Roman's breath caught. The word protect didn't form in his mind. It rose from somewhere deeper, something older than logic, something that did not ask questions. Slowly, Roman stood. Then, in a movement that no one in that room had ever witnessed before, he stepped around his desk and lowered himself to one knee in front of the boy. The king bowed, not to power, not to threat, but to truth. "What is your name?" Roman asked, his voice low, controlled, but no longer empty. "Ethan Cole." Cole. Not Vail. Not Holloway. A hidden name. Roman's gaze shifted to the locket again. His hand moved toward it slowly, almost carefully, as if the past itself might shatter under pressure. Ethan instinctively stepped back half an inch, then stilled again, forcing himself to stay strong. Roman opened the locket. Inside was a faded photograph of Grace Holloway, and beneath it, folded tightly into the metal, a piece of paper in her handwriting. Roman read the words, "He is yours." And for the first time in years, The king felt something that even power could not control. Before Roman Vale became the king of Chicago, before his name carried fear in every whispered deal across the city, he had been something dangerously close to human. Not weak, not naive, but unfinished. His empire had not yet reached its full power, and his control over the underworld was still growing, still fragile enough to be challenged. That was the version of him she met. Not the monster the city feared, but the man who still believed he could choose a different ending. Grace Holloway had never belonged to his world. She was a nurse from Boston, soft-spoken yet unshakably strong, the kind of woman who carried warmth into cold places without even realizing it. She worked long shifts, healed strangers, and believed in saving lives instead of controlling them. When she met Roman, she did not see the danger wrapped around him. She saw the quiet exhaustion behind his eyes. And for the first time in years, Roman found himself standing close to someone who did not flinch under his presence. She spoke to him like he was normal. That alone made her dangerous. Their connection did not begin with fire or chaos. It built slowly, quietly, like something neither of them planned. She laughed without fear. She touched his hand without hesitation. And Roman, who had built his entire life on control, found himself losing it in the safest way possible. Around her, the world felt safe, not because danger disappeared, but because it no longer defined him. For the first time, he wanted out. He never said it directly, but Grace understood. She saw the shift in him, the way his decisions softened, the way his breath slowed when he was near her. She believed in a future where Roman Vale was not a king of shadows, but a man who could walk in daylight without bloodless deals hanging over his name. And slowly, impossibly, Roman began to believe it too. He made plans. Quiet ones. Careful ones. Exit routes from an empire that did not forgive weakness. He was ready to walk away from power, from control, from everything he had built, because for the first time, something mattered more than ruling the city. Then came the betrayal. It did not arrive loudly. It came as information leaked, movements exposed, plans interrupted before they could begin. Someone inside his circle had spoken. Someone he trusted had traded loyalty for advantage. Roman sensed it too late. By the time he realized, the war had already begun moving toward him. The warehouse was supposed to be their escape point. A quiet location near the docks. Temporary. Untraceable. Grace waited there while Roman handled what he believed was the final loose end. He told her to stay inside, to trust him, to wait just a little longer. She smiled at him before he left, her hand resting briefly against his chest, her whisper steady and certain. "I'm not afraid." That was the last moment he saw her alive. The attack came fast. Not loud, not chaotic, but precise. A rival syndicate had found the location. Fire consumed the warehouse before Roman could return. Smoke swallowed everything. By the time he arrived, the structure was already collapsing into itself, the heat unbearable, the air thick with ash and silence. He searched anyway. Not as a king. Not as a strategist. As a man. They found nothing, except the locket, burned along the edges but intact. The same silver piece she always wore. No body. No voice. No answer. Just absence. Roman buried her that night without a grave. And something inside him died with her. The man who once wanted a safe life disappeared completely. What remained was colder, sharper, untouchable. The empire did not just grow after that. It hardened. Roman became more dangerous, more precise, more unforgiving. Betrayal was no longer a risk. It was a guarantee he planned for. Loyalty was no longer earned. It was enforced. Grace Holloway became a memory he locked away. Until now. Back in the present, Roman stood in his private dining hall, watching Ethan eat like survival was still uncertain. The boy said nothing about where he came from. No past. No story. Only small, careful movements, as if every action had once been watched, judged, controlled. Roman noticed everything. The way Ethan kept his back to the wall. The way his eyes scanned exits. The way he did not trust comfort, even when it was offered. This was not just a lost child. This was someone who had learned to survive. Roman stepped closer, his presence filling the space, but softer now, controlled differently. "You're safe here," he said quietly. Ethan didn't respond, but he didn't argue either. That was enough. Roman turned to his men. "Lock down the mansion. Full perimeter. No one gets in without my approval." His voice carried power, but something else lived beneath it now. Possession. Mine. Not in ownership, but in responsibility. Protect. Hours later, in a separate room filled with screens and silent operators, Roman's top investigator returned with new information. His expression was tight, careful. "We traced the boy," he said. Roman's eyes sharpened. "He came from a state orphanage, but the records don't match." A pause. "The name Ethan Cole, it's fake." Ethan Cole did not behave like a child who had just entered the most dangerous fortress in Chicago. He did not hesitate at the doors, did not flinch at the silent men watching from every corner, did not shrink under the weight of a place built entirely on control and power. Instead, he walked through Roman Vale's mansion like he belonged there, like the walls already knew him. The marble floors echoed softly beneath his steps, and yet there was no fear in him. That absence unsettled everyone far more than panic ever could. The guards noticed it first. Men who had spent years enforcing the will of a king, men who had seen betrayal, war, and quiet disappearances, found themselves lowering their voices when the boy passed. Something about Ethan made their instincts shift. Not weakness, not sympathy, something closer to respect. He did not ask permission. He did not search for approval. He simply existed, steady and observant, as if survival had already trained him better than any soldier. Roman watched everything, from a distance at first, from the upper balcony overlooking the main hall, from security feeds, from quiet reflections in polished glass. He studied the boy the same way he studied threats, patterns, weaknesses. But Ethan was not a threat. That was what made him dangerous to Roman's control. The boy's movements were careful but not afraid, his posture small but never defensive. And in certain moments, when Ethan turned his head slightly or paused before speaking, Roman felt his heart pounding again, because it was not just resemblance. It was grace, the same stillness, the same quiet strength, the same way of being close to silence without being consumed by it. Roman had spent years convincing himself that Grace Holloway was gone, reduced to memory and ash. Yet here, walking through his empire, was a living contradiction. Ethan stopped in front of a large window overlooking the city, his small hands pressed lightly against the glass, his breath fogging the surface for a second before fading. "It's big," he murmured, almost to himself. Roman stepped forward, his presence filling the space without warning. "It's controlled," he replied calmly. Ethan didn't look surprised. He simply nodded, as if he understood something deeper in those words. Later, in one of the quieter wings of the mansion, Roman noticed the marks. They were faint, hidden beneath the sleeve of Ethan's shirt, when it shifted slightly as he reached for food. Not fresh enough to demand immediate reaction, but not old enough to ignore. Small bruises, careless ones, the kind left behind not by accidents, but by neglect. Roman's gaze darkened, his entire posture tightening for a fraction of a second. Danger. Not here. Not now. But it had existed around the boy. "Who hurt you?" Roman asked quietly. Ethan froze for a moment, then pulled his sleeve down instinctively. "No one," he said. It was not denial. It was protection. Roman understood that language better than words. "Mine." The thought came without permission, sharp and absolute. Not ownership in the way he claimed territory or power, but something deeper. Responsibility. Protection. A boundary drawn in silence. No one would touch this child again. Roman turned away, already making the decision. Hours later, in his private office, a single phone call was made. No raised voice, no visible anger, just quiet instructions delivered with precision. The orphanage Ethan had come from, the one tied to false records and missing truths, had a director who believed himself untouchable. By morning, his position would be gone. By nightfall, his name would be erased from every system that mattered. Not destroyed publicly, not exposed, removed. That was how a king handled problems when control was absolute. Back in the mansion, Ethan had wandered into a smaller sitting room. On the far wall, placed deliberately where no one else could see it without permission, was a framed photograph. Grace Holloway, smiling softly, frozen in a moment that no longer existed. Ethan stepped closer. He studied the picture for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then, without turning, he asked in a quiet whisper, "Who is she?" Roman stood in the doorway. For the first time in years, he didn't have an immediate answer. "She was someone important," he said finally. Ethan turned slightly, his eyes meeting Roman's. "She looks like me." The words landed harder than any threat. Roman's heart pounding returned, sharper now, louder. This was no longer coincidence. No longer resemblance explained by memory or imagination. Something was wrong, or something was hidden, and Roman Vale did not tolerate unknown variables inside his empire. That night, as Ethan finally slept in a room guarded more heavily than most vaults, Roman stood beside the bed for a long moment. The boy's breathing was calm, steady, unaware of the storm building around him. Roman gave a silent order. A small DNA sample was taken carefully, almost respectfully, without disturbing the child. As Ethan slept peacefully for the first time in a long time, the truth began moving toward Roman, and it would change everything. The results arrived before dawn, delivered in silence, placed directly into Roman Vale's hands as the city outside his empire slept under a false sense of peace. Inside the private office where decisions shaped futures and erased pasts, Roman stood alone, the file resting unopened on the desk for a full minute. His breath was steady, but something beneath it had already shifted. Instinct, anticipation, a quiet warning that whatever truth lived inside those pages would not leave him unchanged. When he finally opened it, the world narrowed. DNA confirmation was clear, undeniable, precise in a way that left no space for doubt. Ethan Cole was Grace Holloway's son. For a second, Roman didn't move. His eyes scanned the line again, slower this time, as if control could rewrite it. But the truth remained. Ethan carried Grace's blood, not resemblance, not coincidence, reality. And yet, another line followed, colder than the first. Roman Vale was not the father. The silence in the room deepened. His heart pounding did not spike like before. It dropped, heavy, controlled, dangerous, because this was not relief. It was something sharper, something closer to loss reborn in a different shape. Grace had lived. She had survived the fire. The night Roman buried her memory, she had still been breathing somewhere in the world, and he had not found her. The file continued. Records traced fragments of her existence across years, hidden movements, false identities, medical logs that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. Someone had kept her invisible. Someone had chosen to hide her from a man who controlled an entire city. That was not coincidence. That was intention. Betrayal without a face. Then came the final line. Grace Holloway had died 2 years ago. No public record. No official cause. Just a quiet disappearance marked as administrative closure. Like she had never existed at all. Roman's fingers tightened slightly against the paper. Rage did not explode. It settled. Deep. Cold. Calculated. The kind of rage that built empires and ended them without noise. Grief followed, but not the broken kind. The controlled kind. The kind a king carried without letting it show. And beneath both, guilt. He had let her dissipate. For years, he had believed she was gone, and instead of searching deeper, he had turned that pain into power. He had chosen control over hope. And now, the truth stood in his mansion, walking his halls, carrying her eyes, her blood, her last living piece. Ethan. Mine. The word came again, stronger now, anchored in something unshakable. Not possession. Not dominance. Something absolute. Protect. Roman closed the file slowly. Find out who hit her, he said without looking up. His investigator hesitated for a fraction of a second. It won't be easy. Roman's gaze lifted, cold and final. Nothing worth keeping ever is. By afternoon, the city felt the shift. Roman Vale did not make emotional decisions publicly. He ruled through calculated silence, through invisible power that shaped outcomes before people realized they were part of them. But this time, he made an announcement. Not to the press, not to politicians, to the underworld. A single message, delivered through channels that reached every corner of his empire and beyond. The boy is under my protection. Untouchable. No elaboration. No explanation. Just truth. The reaction was immediate. Fear spread first, because when a king claimed something so openly, it meant boundaries had shifted. But beneath that fear, curiosity, suspicion. Rival families began asking questions. Why would Roman Vale expose weakness? Why would a man built on control suddenly reveal something personal? In their world, anything personal was a liability, and liability meant opportunity. Roman anticipated it. Ethan was moved to the most secure wing of the mansion. Reinforced walls. Limited access. Guards rotated without pattern. Every entrance monitored. Every exit controlled. Not as a prison, but as a fortress within a fortress. Roman did not explain it to the boy. He simply adjusted the world around him. "Stay here for now," Roman said quietly. Ethan studied him for a moment, then nodded. No fear, just acceptance. As if he trusted Roman without understanding why. That trust cut deeper than any threat. Night fell slowly, wrapping the mansion in silence. Inside Ethan's room, the lights were dim, the air calm, almost safe. For the first time, it felt like the storm had passed. Then it happened. A sharp crack split the silence. Glass shattered. A sniper bullet tore through the window, embedding itself deep into the firewall just inches from where Ethan had been standing moments before. And in that instant, war found its way inside the king's empire. The sound came like a fracture in reality. Glass shattered inward, scattering across the polished floor in a violent shimmer. And for a split second, time slowed inside Roman Vale's empire. Ethan stood near the window, frozen not in fear but in shock, his small body caught between confusion and instinct. Roman did not think. He moved. In one swift motion, he crossed the distance and pulled the boy down, shielding him with his own body as the echo of danger rippled through the room. "Stay down," Roman ordered, his voice low, controlled, absolute. His heart pounding was no longer hidden. It thundered beneath his ribs with a force he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Not fear for himself. Never that. But for the child beneath him. For the last living piece of something he had lost once before. Mine. The word locked into place again. Unbreakable now. Protect. Within seconds, the mansion shifted into full lockdown. Silent alarms triggered, reinforced steel barriers slid into place behind walls, and every guard moved with trained precision. The air itself seemed to tighten, every corner of the estate transforming into a controlled battlefield without chaos, without panic. This was Roman's strength. War, when it came to him, did not explode. It organized itself. "Secure the perimeter," Roman commanded as he rose slowly, keeping Ethan behind him. "No one leaves. No one enters." "Yes, say." The reply came instantly, fueled by loyalty, sharpened by agency. Ethan looked up at him, his breath uneven but steadying. "I'm okay," he said quietly. Roman's gaze softened for a fraction of a second. "You will be," he replied. But inside, something darker had already awakened. The attack was traced within the hour. Victor Kane. The name alone carried weight across the underworld. A rival boss who had built his own power quietly, strategically, never challenging Roman directly, until now. Victor was not reckless. He did not make moves without purpose, which meant this was not just a strike. It was a message. Roman stood in his war room, screens flickering with data, movements, intercepted communications. His empire breathed around him, waiting. "Why now?" one of his men asked carefully. Roman didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the patterns unfolding across the city. Then, slowly, the truth aligned. "Because he knows about her." Silence followed. Victor Kane had known Grace Holloway. Not casually, not distantly, closely. And if Victor knew, then this attack was not about Roman's power. Not entirely. It was about something else. Something hidden. Something connected to Grace. And now, to Ethan. "What does he want?" the man asked. Roman's voice dropped into a cold whisper. Something she left behind. Back in the secured wing, Ethan sat quietly, his small hands gripping the edge of the bed. Roman entered alone this time, the weight of a king temporarily set aside for something more precise. "Ethan," he said. The boy looked up. "Do you remember anything before the orphanage?" Ethan hesitated, his eyes shifting slightly, searching through memories that didn't feel safe. Then, slowly, he nodded. "A woman," he said. "She told me not to trust anyone." Roman stepped closer. "What else did she say?" Ethan's voice dropped, almost like a whisper carried through time. "She said, if something bad happens, I should find Roman Vale." Roman's breath stilled. Grace. She had planned this. Years ago, while hidden, while hunted, while surviving in a world Roman thought had already taken her. She had made a choice. She had prepared for a future where she would not be there. She had chosen him, not as a king, as protection. Something inside Roman shifted permanently. That same night, the city began to change. Roman did not announce war. He executed it. Ports under his control shut down without warning. Cash routes froze. Supply chains collapsed in silence. Men loyal to Victor Kane found doors closing, deals vanishing, alliances dissolving overnight. No explosions. No chaos. Just systematic removal of power. Control tightened across the city like a slow, suffocating grip. This was not rage. This was precision. And it was far more dangerous. Days passed, and inside the mansion, something unexpected began to grow. Ethan no longer stayed in one room. He moved through secured spaces, always watched, always protected, but no longer isolated. He sat near Roman during brief moments of quiet, asking small questions, observing everything. "Do you always work this much?" Ethan asked once. Roman paused, then answered honestly, "Yes." Ethan considered that. "You don't have to." The simplicity of it hit harder than any confrontation. Roman did not respond, but something in him softened. For the first time in years, the king of an empire felt something beyond control. Not weakness, not distraction, connection. Then, one evening, as Roman stood near the window, Ethan walked closer, holding the silver locket in his small hand. "There's something else," Ethan said quietly. Roman turned. Ethan looked up at him. Serious now, steady despite everything. "I hid something inside it." The locket felt heavier than before when Roman took it from Ethan's small hand. Not because of the metal, but because of the truth waiting inside it. The room was silent, the kind of silence that carried fear before anything had even been spoken. Ethan stood close, watching, his breath steady but his eyes alert, as if he already understood that whatever came next would change everything. Roman opened the locket carefully. At first glance, it looked the same. Grace's faded photo, the folded memory of a past he had already failed once. But Ethan reached forward and pressed a hidden edge, something so small it could only be noticed by someone who knew it existed. A thin compartment shifted open, revealing a micro-memory card hidden within the silver frame. Roman's fingers stilled for half a second. Danger. Not from the object, but from what it contained. Within minutes, the file was uploaded into Roman's private system. Screens flickered to life, data unfolding line by line, piece by piece. Financial transfers, hidden routes, private communications encrypted years ago and buried deep enough to remain untouched, until now. Roman watched, and the ground beneath his empire began to crack. The name appeared slowly. Marcus Reed, his underboss, his most trusted man. Loyalty, built over years, proven in silence, reinforced through shared victories and controlled war, shattered in one moment of undeniable truth. Marcus had not just betrayed Roman. He had sold Grace Holloway. Years ago, during the chaos of that night, while Roman was fighting shadows, believing he was protecting her, Marcus had handed her over to Victor Kane. For power, for position, for a future inside an empire he did not build, but intended to control. Roman's expression did not change. That was the most dangerous part, because when a king truly felt betrayal, he did not react immediately. He calculated. He let it settle into something far more permanent than anger. "You're sure?" one of his captains asked quietly, unable to hide the tension. Roman's voice was calm. Too calm. "There's no doubt." The room shifted. Men who had once stood united under one structure now felt the weight of division creeping in. Loyalty was no longer absolute. Fear was no longer directed outward. It had turned inward. Empire, cracking from the inside. Roman stood still for a long moment, staring at the screen, at the evidence, at the years he had built on a foundation that had already been compromised. He had trusted Marcus not just as a soldier, but as a pillar. And now that pillar had revealed itself as rot. "I will handle it," Roman said finally. But he was already too late. The alarm came not from outside the mansion, but from within. "Say, Ethan is gone." The words cut through the room like a blade. Roman turned instantly, his heart pounding, rising into something uncontrollable for the first time. Not rage. Not yet. Faye. Not for himself. For the boy. Security footage flashed across the screens. A blackout in one corridor. A brief disruption in surveillance. A figure moving with precision. Marcus Reed. Calm. Controlled. Familiar enough with the system to bypass it without leaving chaos behind. Ethan had not been taken by force. He had been removed. Cleanly. Roman's control shattered for exactly 1 second. Then it came back stronger. "Lock the city," he ordered. The command was immediate, absolute. No hesitation. No negotiation. This was no longer internal conflict. This was war. Open. Unavoidable. Personal. Across Chicago, the shift was instant. Streets tightened. Alliances split. Some captains remained loyal, standing firm under Roman's command. Others hesitated, calculating where power would land when the dust settled. Betrayal spread faster than bullets ever could. The empire was no longer one. It was fractured. Roman stood in the center of it, the king facing his own creation turning against him. And beneath the control, beneath the strategy, beneath the cold execution of decisions, something deeper burned. He had failed her. Again. Grace had trusted him to protect the one thing she left behind. And now Ethan was gone. Roman closed his eyes for a brief second, his breath steadying, forcing the storm inside him into something sharper. Not chaos. Purpose. When he opened them again, there was no hesitation left. "Find him," he said. Not as an order, as a promise. Minutes later, a message arrived. No words. Just a single image. Roman looked at it once. Ethan. Tied to a chair, surrounded by sealed gasoline drums. And in that moment, the war stopped being about empire. It became personal. Roman did not move immediately after seeing the photo. That was the difference between rage and power. Rage rushed. Power studied. And Roman Vale had built an empire on never reacting before understanding. The image of Ethan tied to that chair burned into his mind, his heart pounding steady and controlled now. Not chaotic. Fear still existed, but it no longer ruled him. It sharpened him. He turned back to Grace's files. Every piece of data extracted from the memory card was reanalyzed, reconnected, reinterpreted, not as a victim story, but as a strategy. And slowly, the truth unfolded into something Roman had not expected. Grace had not been hiding. She had been building. Hidden accounts, encrypted communications, carefully placed evidence across multiple syndicates. She had spent years mapping networks Roman himself had never fully exposed. Names, roots, alliances, betrayals. She had walked through the shadows not as prey, but as something far more dangerous. She was not a victim. She became powerful. The realization hit deeper than anything before. Grace had survived not by running, but by adapting, by becoming something the underworld could not easily destroy. A queen without a throne, moving silently between enemies, collecting truths they thought were buried forever. And everything she did had one purpose: protect Ethan. Roman's breath slowed as the final layer revealed itself. Coordinates, hidden carefully within a string of seemingly meaningless data points. Not random, not accidental. A location, a warehouse. Roman's eyes darkened. Marcus. It aligned perfectly. The same pattern, the same calculated precision. Grace had left this behind knowing one day Roman would find it, knowing he would understand, knowing he would come. She trusted me, Roman said quietly, not as a question, as a fact he had finally earned. Within minutes, the operation began. No announcements, no visible movement, just silent execution. Roman moved with a small, elite group. No unnecessary force, no chaos. This was not a public war move. This was personal. The warehouse stood isolated, forgotten by the city, exactly the kind of place used for secrets no one wanted discovered. Roman approached without hesitation, his presence alone carrying enough power to shift the air around him. His men followed, but they did not lead. The king walked first. Inside, the silence was wrong. Too controlled, too still. Marcus was waiting. Roman stepped forward, each movement deliberate, every sense focused. Danger lived in every shadow, but he did not rush. He understood Marcus now. A man who relied on manipulation, not noise. Control, not chaos. Then the first movement. Not an attack. A distraction. Roman didn't react to it. He moved past it. Straight to the center. Ethan was not there. For a brief second, fear flickered again. Then, a sound. Soft. Close. Roman turned. Ethan emerged from behind a stack of crates. Small. Steady. Untouched by panic. His hands were free. I got out, he said quietly. Roman froze for half a second. How? He asked. Ethan looked down, then back up. She taught me. Grace. Survival. Patience. Timing. The Queen had prepared him. Roman stepped closer, placing a firm hand on the boy's shoulder, grounding him. Safe. Behind them, a slow clap echoed through the space. Marcus Reed stepped forward. No panic. No desperation. Just a man who still believed he had control. You finally understand, Marcus said, his voice calm. She was never yours to protect. Roman's gaze didn't shift. You sold her. Marcus smiled faintly. I elevated myself. Betrayal spoken without regret. That was his mistake. Because Roman no longer saw Marcus as a man. He saw him as something already removed. Power built on betrayal always collapses, Roman said quietly. Marcus's expression flickered for the first time. A crack. Small, but real. In that moment, everything ended. Not loudly, not violently, decisively. Marcus's control dissolved as quickly as it had been built. The empire he tried to reshape rejected him. Loyalty he thought he owned turned silent. And for the first time, fear reached him. Real fear. I can still. Marcus started, his voice tightening. Roman stepped closer. No, he said simply. There was nothing left to negotiate. Nothing left to take. Marcus Reed had already lost the moment the truth came to light. And Roman finally understood. Grace had never stopped fighting. Even in silence. Even in shadows. Even in death. She had built something stronger than fear. A legacy. A plan. A future. Roman turned away, guiding Ethan beside him, leaving the past exactly where it belonged. Behind. Back in the mansion, the final file was opened. A video. Grace Holloway appeared on the screen. Alive. Calm. And looking directly at him. Her voice began to play. Roman, if you're seeing this. The screen flickered softly in the dim room as Grace Holloway's final message played. Her voice steady, calm, untouched by fear even in the face of everything she had endured. Roman stood still, Ethan beside him, both watching the woman who had shaped their lives in ways neither of them fully understood until this moment. She looked the same, not broken, not defeated, but certain, strong, like a queen who had ruled quietly while the world believed she was gone. Roman, if you're seeing this, it means I couldn't finish what I started, her voice said gently, almost like a whisper meant only for him. But that doesn't mean it ends here. It means you have a choice now. Roman's breath slowed as he listened. I didn't survive all those years just to hide. I fought. I learned. I became something they never expected. She was not a victim, and I needed you to understand that. I became powerful so Ethan could live free of this world. Not inside it. Not under it. Ethan's small hand tightened slightly at his side. Grace's eyes softened on the screen. He deserves a safe life, Roman. Not an empire built on shadows. Protect him, but don't turn him into you. The message ended without drama. No goodbye. Just trust. The silence that followed was heavier than any war Roman had ever fought. For the first time in years, the King of Chicago stood not at the center of control, but at the edge of a decision that would redefine everything he had built. His empire had been forged through precision, fear, loyalty enforced through consequence. It had survived betrayal, expanded through calculated dominance, and crushed everything that threatened it. But now, it stood at a crossroads. Roman looked at Ethan. The boy did not speak. He did not need to. His presence alone carried the weight of Grace's final request. A future not shaped by fear. A life not defined by survival. Something inside Roman shifted permanently. This ends, he said quietly. Not as a reaction. As a command to himself. The transformation did not happen overnight. Empires do not collapse. They evolve. Roman began dismantling the parts of his network that thrived on darkness. Illegal routes closed. Hidden operations erased. Systems that once ran through shadows were replaced with structures that could exist in daylight. Legitimate businesses expanded rapidly, absorbing the space left behind. Ports became regulated. Investments surfaced publicly. The city did not fall into chaos. It stabilized. Because Roman did not remove power. He redefined it. Rivals watched carefully at first. Waiting. Testing. But one by one, they understood. The king had not weakened. He had shifted into something more dangerous. More controlled. More untouchable. Some chose loyalty. bending quietly under the new order. Others disappeared from relevance, their influence dissolving without noise. The empire still existed, but it no longer fed on Faye. It commanded respect. Inside the mansion, the change was even more profound. What had once been a fortress built on isolation slowly became something else. The silence softened. The tension eased. Guards still stood watch, but their presence no longer carried the same weight of constant danger. The walls remained strong, but they no longer felt like a cage. Ethan noticed it first. "This place feels different," he said one evening, standing close to Roman near the main hall. Roman looked around, then back at him. "It is." Ethan nodded, accepting it in the simple way children understand truth without needing explanation. Days turned into weeks, and eventually, Ethan Cole became something more than a guest under protection. Legal papers were signed quietly, without publicity, without spectacle, but the meaning behind them was absolute. Mine, not as possession, as family. Roman Vale, the king of an empire, became a guardian. And Ethan grew without fear shaping him. He learned strength, but not cruelty. Awareness, but not suspicion. Power, but not control over others. The balance Grace had fought for finally existed. In the center of the mansion, the largest hall was changed. Where once there had been empty space, now stood a single portrait. Grace Holloway, placed not as a memory, but as a queen. Not forgotten, not hidden, honored. Roman stood before it one night, alone, his breath steady, his thoughts finally quiet. For years, he had believed the past was something buried to survive, something lost forever. But now he understood. It had returned, not to destroy him, to save him. A soft sound pulled him from the moment. Ethan's voice. "They're ready," the boy said. Roman turned, walking beside him toward the dining hall where a small celebration had been arranged. Not for power, not for victory, for something simpler. A beginning. As they entered, the atmosphere felt warm, grounded, almost unfamiliar in its peace. People who had once lived in constant tension now sat together, without fear pressing against every breath. Loyalty still existed, but it no longer came from threat. It came from choice. Then the doors opened. A young woman stepped inside. Unfamiliar. Calm. Her presence carried something Roman recognized instantly. Certainty. In her hand, she held a silver locket. The same design. The same weight of truth. Ethan turned toward her, his expression shifting slightly. Something deeper than recognition flickering in his eyes. The woman stepped forward slowly, and in a quiet whisper that echoed through the room, she spoke. "Ethan Holloway. Some stories don't end. They wait for the truth to be uncovered. If this story made you feel something, don't just watch it. Be part of it. Hit like, share it with someone who understands loyalty, and subscribe, because the next truth might change everything again. And now tell me this. If you were Roman, would you protect the boy? Or protect your empire?"